Okay. All right. Last time we started on the Sophists. Well, actually, I wanted to get your guys' feedback a little bit from last time. So we did that deep dive into the Protagoras Dialogue. How many of you liked that? Did you like doing that kind of pseudo deep dive, or would you have preferred to just cover more material and not have that kind of depth?
That was pretty cool. I liked it.
You like the depth?
I liked it, yeah.
Is there anyone who felt like I would have rather have just done more material and dropped the depth? Okay, so that's good to know. It slows down the rate that we go, but I mean, it really doesn't matter what rate we do go. We can do this as long as we want. So I'll continue to have some more stuff like that as we go down the road. Was there anything else I needed to say before we started this? No, occurred to me as we go, if I did. Okay, so we started on the Sophists, and we started on Protagoras. We went through the Protagoras Dialogue, so I'm just going to restart Protagoras, skipping over the dialogue this time, and just covering him how we would have without the dialogue. So maybe reset the scenes with the Sophists a little bit. Who are the Sophists?
They were rhetorics, the guys in court.
Rhetoricians, yeah. They teach rhetoric.
They were the ones who contended with Socrates, right?
Yeah, Socrates is always in opposition to the Sophists. So the Sophists are introducing skepticism into Greek thought. I shouldn't say that, they're introducing it. Athens is going through a very skeptical movement right now, right? Economically, they're booming, times are good. Often associated with that is a skeptical movement. So the population is becoming more skeptical in general, and the Sophists can be viewed as the intellectuals pushing forward this skeptical movement. There's no such thing as objective or absolute good, true or beautiful. Those are all subjective and relative. It's all in the eye of the beholder. What it is what it is to you and to you now, and it could change down the road, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's that way for me. Socrates is completely opposed to them. Socrates wholeheartedly believes in objective and absolute good, objective and absolute truth, objective and absolute beauty. If you ask Socrates what is philosophy, he'd say it's the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful. And those are objective, absolute things. Your opinion about them are entirely irrelevant. They are what they are. Maybe you have the right opinion, maybe you don't. So he's a completely anti-skeptic, yeah, that's a good way to classify him. So he's always opposed to the Sophists in their skeptical movement, but the Sophists are the first avowed skeptics. Anything else we remember about them? Nothing? Why are they hated?
Because they teach persuasion, right?
They teach persuasion. Why does that bother the masses?
Because they only teach those that can afford it.
Right, so there's a huge demand for the Sophists. Right now, if you are a rhetorician, if you are well practiced in rhetoric, you can obtain political power. And you can keep yourself out of trouble at the same time. So this art of rhetoric is very valuable, and not a lot of people are going around claiming to be able to teach it. So there's a huge demand for the Sophists, which means that they can charge high prices for their teaching, which means the wealthy are the only ones that can afford them, the poor people can't afford them, and so they're resented by the masses, the majority of people, which is why a lot of them end up, before it's all said and done, being kicked out of Athens, being driven out. So Protagoras, he's the first of the Sophists from Abdera. Remember where Abdera is? It's up here, same place that the Atomists were from, Democritus and Leucippus. He's the first one to call himself a Sophist, visit Athens 3 times. He was a friend of Pericles, which ultimately gets him in political trouble because Pericles has his falling out. And then we already went over the dialogue that Plato had called Protagoras, which was meant to somewhat capture his second visit to Athens. And then his last visit to Athens is when he's accused of impiety, all his works are burned, and basically driven out of the city. And we went over this whole dialogue. Did we have any questions about any of this? I don't know if anyone went back and read it and had any questions before we continue with him.
Did you share this slideshow with us so we can read back?
You want to read back the slides? Just read the actual Protagoras work. I could probably share it with you so that you can't edit it. Not sure how to do that yet. Never tried it. I'm sure I can do that easy enough. So if you email me or something when I'm at my computer and can do that, and ask me to share it with you, then I'll figure out how to do it and share it with you. Huh?
And you just gotta have the insight to know when you're at your computer.
I'm there from 9 to 5 every day. Okay, Protagoras. So he's the first of these sophists, and if you were to ask some random philosopher, what's the most famous thing Protagoras ever said, he'd quote to you this exact statement. Man is the measure of all things, of things that are, that they are, of things that are not, that they are not. Let's say that again. Man is the measure of all things, of things that are, that they are, of things that are not, that they are not. What is or is not, whatever man measures. What determines reality? Man's measurement of reality. Let's go back to thinking about the three different temperatures of water. Say I've got boiling water, freezing water, and lukewarm water. One guy sticks his hand in the boiling water, then the lukewarm water, and he says, "Oh, how cold." Another man sticks his hand in the ice cold water, the freezing water, and then sticks it in the lukewarm water, and he says, "Oh, how warm." What is the water's temperature actually? Is it warm or is it cold? What is it? Man's the measure. It is warm to the first man right now, and it is cold to the second man right now. That might change down the road, right? The man could then take his hand out, stick it in the hot water, and then stick it back in, and now it just went from cold to hot or from hot to cold. And then you keep playing with it. And what the water actually is changes from moment to moment for that man. And what it is for him isn't necessarily what it is for you. It may be, it may not be. And what it is for him now may not be what it is for him later. Man is the measure of all things. Of things that are, that they are. Of things that are not, that they are not. So you see the inherent skepticism in this statement, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Our author, I'm pretty sure, teaches philosophy at a Christian school somewhere, I'm not sure. He always focuses on their statements about the gods, so since he put so much emphasis on it, I do too, since I know you're all reading the textbook, and so you'd be confused if I didn't bring up and emphasize the same things that the author did. So about the gods, I am not able to know whether they exist or do not exist, nor what they are like in form, for the factors preventing knowledge are many, the obscurity of the subject and the shortness of human life. So he's also skeptical about knowledge of the gods, which you can see how that could easily lead him in trouble when it comes to being accused of impiety. Diogenes Laertius, remember he's a historian later in life, going back capturing a lot of these people. We've referenced him a lot of the times. He's a major resource for a lot of early philosophers. So he tells us that he, Protagoras, was the first to maintain that in every experience there are two logoi, two different arguments in opposition to each other. So Protagoras was the first one to point out, look, it doesn't matter what proposition you give me, there's good arguments in favor of it, and there's good arguments opposed to it. And so how can you say one argument is better than another argument? And how can you say it's really right or wrong if I can find two equally good arguments, two arguments that both seem persuasive, arguing completely opposite conclusions? Now, some of you with a little bit more mathematical education might say, that's not the case in math. And it might be worth knowing that Protagoras wasn't very big on math. He kind of avoided the subject, thought it was too laborious. So maybe he didn't give too much thought to the propositions in mathematics when he was making the statement. Maybe he meant more political type statements. Yeah. Anyways. So, to sum up, what does he think so far? Whatever seems to me to be at any given moment is. And what seems not to be is not. The fact that it may seem otherwise to me later, or to another now, indicates that no truth is possible, and that every judgment is opinion at best. Does that confuse you?
No, I'm just laughing at his logic.
Oh, this isn't his logic. This is me trying to sum up and make sure you have an understanding for the skepticism endowed in here.
I see it.
Well, there is a little bit of an argument in there saying that, therefore, there's no such thing as objective knowledge, objective and absolute knowledge, because you keep changing your mind about what the temperature of that water is, right? So that's the problem. Yes, I should have focused on the water too much since I had this in here. Same thing, consider a breeze. Now you might have had the experience on a nice warm summer day, you got in a pool and you get out of the pool and there's a warm breeze that comes by and you're like, oh, that breeze feels so warm. Well, quickly dry off, go run 2 miles and then feel the breeze. Oh, it feels nice and cool. It's the same breeze. At one moment it's warm, at one moment it's cool. Right? So consider a breeze. To some it may feel warm, to others it may feel cool. There's no point in arguing whether it's really one or the other. We can only know how it appears to us and how it appears to us now. Because that can change, right? So how can we say it absolutely is one way or another? A thermometer. But that's just being used as a representation for any perception. Anytime you and I have 2 different perceptions of something, how can we say it's really one way or another way?
Can't.
Like going back to the colorblind man. Say you live in a city where everyone you know is colorblind and you're the only one that sees color. Is that thing really brown? Or is that just the way you see it?
Just the way I see it.
What about everyone else? Is the way that they see it less valid than the way you see it? Who's right? What color is it really? Or imagine you had eyes that could somehow see like a larger range than regular human eyes. So right now we can see what we call visible light. Imagine you had such crazy eyes that you could see everything from gamma rays to microwaves. And you turn on the microwave and you can see those things coming off. And some weird color that whatever your brain contrives, is it really that color? That's how you see it. Is it really that color for you now?
So what's
Who's
the
to say
answer?
what it really is? Good. I got you wondering about an absurd position. Means I'm presenting it well.
So, okay.
So that's what he's arguing. You can't know one way or the other. Man is the measure of all things. How man measures it is the way that it is. And he also doesn't mean take a vote. He means each individual person. It's true for them. He's not saying man is like the human race. Let them all measure and then we'll tally up their votes and whatever they say works. Because their votes could change with time. So he's running into the same problem. So he's saying you right now, the way you experience the world, is the way the world is right now to you. And there's no sense about talking about it outside of that. There is no objective, absolute reality. There's just you and your... Well, there could be absolute objective reality, but there is no absolute objective truth about that reality. Nothing can really be known about it. All that can be known is your own little perception, perspective. Okay. Now, before we get to Aristotle's statement here, note that to say that conflicting statements on the same thing are equally and simultaneously true is an assault on the principle of contradiction. Something both is and is not this thing right now. Right? You see how it allows that? You see how 2 people saying that the same thing is both is and is not something implies a contradiction? Okay, so Aristotle is going to be attacking that now, and you will see how he makes reference to Protagoras. We observe next that if all contradictories were true at the same time of the same thing, it is clear that all things would be one. For if anything may be affirmed or denied of everything, as those must maintain who say what Protagoras says. Notice Aristotle's going to be much more familiar with what Protagoras actually said than we are, so he actually had access to his works and stuff like that. Then the same thing would be a trireme, a wall, and a man. These would all be the exact same thing. For if someone should hold that a man is not a trireme, clearly he is not a trireme. Then, if the contradictory be also true, he also is a trireme. You see that? Know what a trireme is? A big boat with 3 rows of oars. So I say, Leah, you're not a trireme, right? Clearly, you're Leah. So you're not a trireme. So you are a trireme. And the trireme is not Leah, it's a trireme. And since it's not Leah, it is Leah. So Leah and the trireme are one. You are the trireme, and the trireme is you.
Okay, but
So that's what he means by everything is one. The same.
where are the contradictions coming from? I don't get that, because you can just say that you aren't something, but where is that you are?
Donnie said
If
you're
you
a
allow
trireme.
contradictions to be true, then I can
Is
allow...
he allowing contradiction? I
Protagoras is allowing contradictions to be
How?
true. Everything both is and is not, however someone says it is.
Donnie says you're a trireme, I say you're Leah.
Who's right?
Yeah.
So once you allow contradictions to be true, then everything falls apart, which is what Aristotle's pointing out here. He's saying one of the obvious absurdities, so this is called a Reductio ad Absurdum type proof. We deal with a particular type of these proofs in mathematics. We call them a proof by contradiction. But the way a Reductio ad Absurdum proof works in general is, show that your position leads to an absurd conclusion. If that happens, then your position's false. So allowing contradictions leads to Leah being a trireme. That's obviously absurd. Therefore, you can't allow contradictions. Any more questions? All right. So, as you can see, Protagoras is one who starts the assault on the possibility of objective and absolute knowledge. He's the first skeptic. Now, starts the assault, we should probably qualify that a little bit. You might think back to Heraclitus, and he had his follower, I just lost his name, Cratylus. So why aren't we saying that the assault started with them? The reason that we're not is because Cratylus was kind of the end of a Heraclitean movement and then just kind of stopped dead there. Protagoras is going to be the start of a big movement, the big skeptical movement. So you could argue that, really, Cratylus was the first skeptic. Since his work didn't really amount to anything, no one really followed him, and didn't have any long-term effects, we kind of ignore that fact. And so we start with Protagoras, who's going to be the start of this big movement. So Protagoras starts the assault on the possibility of objective and absolute knowledge. He's the first avowed skeptic. Well, Sophists, and the Sophists are in general skeptic. While he cannot teach knowledge, he can teach the art of persuasion, the technique of leading others to accept one's own view. In doing so, he teaches how contradictory propositions can be shown to be equally true and equally false. This way, his students are prepared to argue either side of an argument. So we prepare you, if we're trying to get you trained to be a well-performing citizen, to be able to argue any side of any position, whatever suits you best. If you're the head of some tobacco industry, you might need to be ready on the fly to give an argument that smoking's actually good for you. And you got to be ready to argue that side because that's what's going to benefit you here and now. So he's training you so that no matter how absurd your position is, you're ready to argue the one that you think will benefit you the most. This is the part of the training and preparation that they're giving you, so that you can persuade other people to listen to you, so that you can gain political power and wealth and everything else. So that's what he's out to teach his students. And he helps his students, look, there is no objective truth or reality. All that matters is, what can you convince other people to agree? If you can get more people to see your way of seeing things, then more people have the same truth that you have. And now you have the same truth, and you're on the same page, because you persuaded them to think like you. And man's the measure of all things. So persuasion's how you change more truth to be the way you want to be. According to Aristotle, this style of teaching did not involve reasoning, but rather focused on grammar and on wordplay. So he gives an example of these types of sophistical arguments. One example he gives is, I'll just kind of give it in the first person so the verbiage flows better. So let's pretend I'm a sophist and I'm talking to you, and you're a typical Greek citizen, and you tell me that you've got a dog, and he just mated with another dog you had and had puppies. All right? So your dog, we're talking about the male, your dog just had puppies, and you just tell me about them. So I say, you have a dog, yes, and your dog just had puppies, yes, and you're sure that he's the father of the puppies? Yeah, I'm positive he's the father of these puppies. So the dog's the father? Yes. So it's your dog? Yeah. And it's a father? Yeah. So it's your father. And the pups are your brothers and sisters.
That's so weird.
So you see, that's a sophistical argument. That's the type of training that the sophists would undergo, the pupils of these sophists would undergo to be ready to argue any side of anything, to confuse people into thinking that they're somehow right. And you can see how that type of argument, maybe not that one directly, but more insidious arguments using that same type of wordplay could persuade people to start thinking you might be right. You might remember, clear back at the first class, I wrote something like, I can't even remember what it was, but I did something to the effect of showing -1 is equal to ... is equal to 1, right?
Yeah.
And I had some of you questioning, is that true? Does that work? Right? And here you were considering throwing all your understanding of mathematics out the window because some subtly deceptive argument came along that might have tripped you up. So these sophists train in coming up with these subtly deceptive arguments to get their position, get their way, get you to agree with them, get you to think that they're right using this type of wordplay.
That's scary.
Yeah, you can see another reason why they weren't particularly loved.
Yeah.
Okay, so that gives you a good taste for Protagoras. We ready to go on to the next one, or did we have any questions about him before we move on? All right, so the next major sophist is Gorgias. Protagoras and Gorgias are considered the two biggies of the sophists. Those are the two names that you'll remember for the sophists 10 years from now. You won't remember any of the other names that we cover. So these are the two big ones. Gorgias of Leontini, which is from the island of Sicily. This is Sicily. We're zoomed up. Italy's right here. The Italian peninsula. A little bit of water here. This is Sicily. Syracuse is right here. Leontini is right here. Notice it's close to Acragas. Who was from Acragas? No. Xenophanes was... Oh, Xenophanes, no. Xenophanes is clear from Asia Minor. Empedocles. We remember Empedocles. Remember Empedocles at all? The four elements, fire, water, earth, air, Empedocles. Empedocles, the one who says, I walk around you. Immortal God, no longer mortal. That Empedocles. Empedocles, that ardent soul, leapt into Etna and was roasted whole. That Empedocles. Alright, so he's from the same island that Empedocles is on, which makes good sense because he was a student of Empedocles. So Gorgias is a student of Empedocles. And we might remember Aristotle, the same way that he described Zeno as the father of same way he described Zeno as the father of dialectic, he described Empedocles as the father of rhetoric. And the same way that Protagoras claimed himself to be a sophist, Gorgias claims himself to be, more than that, just a rhetorician. So Gorgias flat out says that he's a rhetorician and the art that he teaches is rhetoric. He doesn't even pretend to teach the virtues anymore as well. He just teaches plain old rhetoric. And he says that right. Which makes sense since he's a student of Empedocles. Empedocles was the last one who was using poetical writing to get his philosophy, to express his philosophy. So he was the last one using the poetical writing, still wasn't very rigorous writing, but meant to be very persuasive, father of rhetoric. Now we have Gorgias, who's considered an amazing rhetorician, the great rhetorician of his day. So while he's a student of Empedocles, he's still a sophist, and he's following Protagoras in this skeptical movement that's now going on, and he's going to be very familiar with Protagoras. These two are two people competing with each other for gaining followers, but very familiar with each other's positions, ideas, and they're very much in the same vein when it comes to the skeptical movement. Only difference is Gorgias is a much bigger skeptic than Protagoras is, and we'll see some of his positions. He goes well beyond man is the measure of all things. So we'll get to that, but let's name some of the stuff he's a little bit famous for. So in a dispute between his native city and Syracuse, remember Syracuse is really relatively close to them, and if you two cities at this time, lots of disputes are going to come up over and over again, even if it's just something as petty as who has control over this stream. Maybe that's an important stream for giving livestock water for your citizens, stuff like that. So there's going to be these little disputes that come up between close cities all the time. Now, at this time in the Greek world, everyone's kind of divided between Athens and Sparta. You're either with Athens or you're with Sparta. It's kind of like during the Cold War worldwide, you're either with America or you're with Russia. Those are the two powers, but everyone's kind of on one side or the other. Similar thing going on in Greece at this time. Everyone's kind of either on the Athenian side or the Spartan side. Now, since both these cities are on the Athenian side, they don't want to take any action against each other that Athens isn't going to support. So anytime two city-states that kind of fall under Athens have a problem with each other, they kind of need to work it out through Athens, and Athens acts as like the mediator for them to decide what's fair, what's not fair. So that's what's going on here. So Gorgias, in a dispute between his native city and Syracuse, he's traveling to Athens in 427 BC as an embassy, and he ends up winning Athens to his side over the representative from Syracuse. So he ends up getting Athens to agree with him that, yep, they should favor his city and not Syracuse in this little dispute. And it was shows like that won him this fame. He kept getting this rhetorical fame. He was asked a few times to go speak at the Olympics, which was a huge honor. So it was events like this that won him his fame until he could start building up a following as a sophist, teaching pupils. This, along with many other similar victories, won him fame as a great rhetorician. Now, nowadays, it seems like anyone talking about the Sophists nowadays kind of goes back and does a little bit of justifying on their behalf or defending them, saying they weren't really saying what you think they were saying type arguments. And Gorgias falls in that category. So it's true that in the society that we live in, our population is becoming more and more skeptical. And so more and more of our population, their natural tendencies lean more towards the skeptics than they do towards Socrates. So as people go back and talk about Protagoras and Gorgias, more and more modern the philosophers are, the more likely they are to give Protagoras and Gorgias the benefit of the doubt, trying to paint them in a better light, and more they're going to ridicule Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, trying to paint them in a worse light. So that's a common trend going on right now. And so anytime you talk about Gorgias, there's going to be all sorts of people saying, you can't really know what he's saying. It's extremely difficult to know what he's saying. One of the things they used to reference that is
Because they always have like changing positions. They just argue.
it's if you can't nail Gorgias down to saying one thing, then you can't ever really call him wrong. Because you can't ever really argue against what he was saying. So anytime you say, well, Gorgias said this, which is obviously wrong because blah, 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 I can say, no, he wasn't really saying that. He wasn't really saying that. And I can keep tiptoeing away from you however you try to attack Gorgias, which is a common thing going on now. So it's like a little bit of not really rewriting history. They're still telling the truth, but intentionally changing how they say things to make their more extreme positions seem less extreme than they really were. That type of thing. So it's extremely difficult to know Gorgias's actual positions on anything. Aristotle claims that Gorgias recommended responding to seriousness with jest and to jest with seriousness. But we usually take what Gorgias actually wrote in his works. Well, we have some of his works or commentaries on his works. So we view what he actually wrote down as him taking himself seriously. So did his contemporaries. So did those that came after him. So that's what we'll go over, is what he said in his books rather than what he's supposed to have said in other places. Okay. Before we get to his books, some more things about him. He's famous for allowing his audiences to submit anonymous questions, each of which he promised he would answer. So when he goes to a place, he gives some presentation of his skill to an audience, and his audience is allowed to submit him questions, and he'll answer any questions that they ask him. He promises that he'll answer. In fact, when Socrates is doing this to him, he brags, yeah, you can ask me any question. On top of that, it's been a long time since I've been asked a new question. He's a bit older than Socrates, probably like 15 years older than him, somewhere around there. So this is one of the famous things that he would do. Now, he wrote a book. He wrote a textbook on rhetoric, composed of many speeches on many topics for the students to memorize and practice. So this is how he had his students learn rhetoric. Yep, just a bunch of speeches for you to memorize. But I'm sure that on top of that, it was memorization with notes in there to say, make sure you fluctuate this way or express it with this emotion, stuff like that. So a bunch of examples of speeches that you can memorize, so that, for one, now you have those speeches memorized on that topic. Whenever that topic comes up, you're ready to display a great skill, and 2, to see general patterns for these types of speeches. Many refer to Gorgias as the nihilist or the first nihilist, nihilism being the view that all values are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated. Often sentiment that goes along with nihilism is nothing means everything, everything's meaningless. There's no real purpose in life. That's a nihilistic view. So on top of that book, finally the important work, he also wrote a textbook on nature titled On Not Being or On Nature. Another interpretation of the title is On Nature or the Non-Existent. So what's he arguing in the book? Essentially he's arguing that nature doesn't exist. There's no such thing as nature. Now going back to the way that they're using the terminology here, remember that they're talking about a dichotomy between convention and nature. Either something exists by nature or it exists by convention. If you remember this back to the atomists. The atomist says, in nature, there's atoms in the void, and then everything else just exists by convention. By convention sweet, by convention bitter, by convention hot, by convention cold. But in reality, atoms in the void.
Yeah.
So he's going to argue in this textbook, there is nothing that exists by nature. It all exists by convention. There's no such thing as this nature to make reference to. It's all just human convention. Anything that's right, anything that's true, anything that's beautiful, it's just human convention. It's not objectively or absolutely that way. So remember, Protagoras didn't go so far as to deny nature. He just says we can't know about nature. Gorgias is denying nature outright. So in this textbook, On Not Being or On Nature, he argues 3 particular points that we'll go over each of them and try to give a rough sketch of the argument he used. So first he argues nothing exists. And remember, he's a skeptic. So you might say, how do you know for sure that nothing exists? Well, if anything exists, it's incomprehensible. Well, how do you know it's incomprehensible? Well, even if it is comprehensible, it's incommunicable. You couldn't tell anyone about it. So nothing exists. Even if it did exist, you couldn't comprehend it. Even if you could comprehend it, you couldn't tell anyone else about it.
What if you could?
Well, I think after this he feels like he's pretty much covered his bases. That's pretty good skepticism right there. Nothing exists. Even if it did exist, it's incomprehensible. Even if it is comprehensible, you couldn't tell anyone about it. It's incommunicable. All right. And we've already kind of covered the note. Some people go back doing apologetic type work for him, saying he argued these things just to prove that he could argue anything no matter how absurd, but that is not the way that his contemporaries viewed these arguments. Nonetheless, people did make reference to these arguments later, so bringing up the arguments is good nonetheless. But it's hard to believe that he wrote an entire textbook just as a way to show that he could write a textbook rather than to actually argue something. Okay, so let's go over each of these 3 mini arguments. The first argument, nothing exists. Now the proof consists in showing that neither being nor non-being can exist. So if you can't have being and you can't have non-being, then nothing exists. You with me? Okay, so if non-being existed, then non-being would have being, which is a contradiction. Therefore non-being doesn't exist. You see, you just ripped out Parmenides right there. Same way Parmenides argues against non-being. Now, in showing that being does not exist, Gorgias shows that it is not eternal, nor is it created, nor both, nor is it one, nor is it many, therefore it does not exist. You with me? Okay, now I'm not going to bother with the nor is it created, nor both part of this, because those are basically Parmenidean. So I'm just going to show the not eternal, and then the not one or the many. But similar types of argument. So let's show why it can't be eternal. Nature, the universe, existence, can't be eternal. Being is not eternal. If it were eternal, it would have no beginning and also no end, and so it would be boundless. If it's boundless, it has no position, for if it had position, it would have position inside some container and therefore be bounded. Okay, this one's kind of a weird piece of logic. So first off, he's going from the universe being eternal to it being boundless. You see how that's like using its infinite in time to its infinite in space and time. Kind of weird logic there. But then this next one he's saying, if it's boundless, it can't have position. Now, if I say, where am I? How would you describe where I am right now?
In the room.
I'm where?
In the room.
I'm in the classroom. I'm in room, what room are we in? 5, standing in front of the whiteboard. See how you have to make reference to some exterior as to where my position is? Position doesn't really make sense if you're not saying position relative to some container. If you had to tell John Doe right now where Donald Timpson is, how would you tell him without making reference to some container? You see the problem? So that's what he's saying here with the container. So, if something's boundless, it can't have a position. For if it had a position, it would have to have a position relative to some thing it has a position in. But if it's inside something, if it's in some sort of container, it's bounded. Right? Isn't that what it means for something to be bounded? You can put some sort of container around it. So it's boundless, makes it bounded. So, if it were eternal, it would have no beginning, and so it would be boundless. If it were boundless, it has no position. For if it had position, it would have position inside some container, and therefore be bounded. And since beginning has no position, or since being has no position, it is nowhere, and therefore does not exist. It's eternal, which means it's boundless, which means it has no position. Because it's having position means it's bounded. So it's eternal, which means it has no beginning, which means it's boundless, which means it has no position. And something that has no position doesn't exist, right? If it's nowhere, it doesn't exist. Therefore, being does not exist. So there's this argument against being can't be eternal. It being eternal implies it doesn't exist. Good? Do you? Okay, let's make sure we understand the logic here. I mean, it's obviously not a valid argument, but try to at least understand the logic of the argument. If it were eternal, it'd have no beginning, right? If it has no beginning, then it's boundless.
Yeah.
And if it's boundless, then it has no position.
Right.
You follow that? So it has no position, so it's nowhere. So it doesn't exist.
What if it's everywhere?
If it's everywhere, then it's at least somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it'd have no position.
All right. So I think you see the logic of the argument he's using. Okay. And the other two, very similar Parmenidean arguments. Okay. If being is one, it has size, and if it has size, it has magnitude. With me so far? Just gonna follow Zeno here.
What does he mean by one?
Is being one or is it many? Parmenides said being is one. One undifferentiated mass of just being.
Right.
Being was one. The atomists say being is many. Oh, there are atoms in the void. Infinitely little many beings all over the place in the void.
Okay.
Okay?
What is he arguing right here?
He's going to argue that being can't be one, and it also can't be many. He's arguing for no being.
Oh, okay.
So he's showing Parmenides is wrong and the atomists are wrong.
Okay.
He's throwing out everything. He's saying you can't say anything. There is no being. He's not arguing for he's not telling you what nature is. He's saying there is no nature. So Parmenides and the atomists are arguing about what nature is. He's coming along saying, no, there is no nature. You're both wrong. Okay, so if being is one, it has size, right?
Yeah.
And if it had size, it has magnitude. If it has size, then there's some number you can apply to that size to say it's this big. Okay, any magnitude is infinitely divisible. This was just Zeno, so I didn't bother spelling this out too much.
Yeah.
This is what Zeno used. And so if being is one, it is many.
Yeah.
There's your contradiction. You just followed Zeno exactly. If it's one, then it's many. Okay, if being is many, then it is many ones, right? And so now zoom in on one of those ones, and that one has to be many. We already showed that there being a one implies a contradiction. So if there's many, there is many ones, and there being a one has already been shown to be impossible. Therefore, it is neither many nor one. Being is neither many nor one. Alright, so being, it's not eternal, it's not created, it's not both, it's not one, and it's not many. Therefore, it doesn't exist.
Where was the both argument?
We skip the nor is it created nor both, because the argument against created is if. Okay, we'll just do it real quick. If it was created, then what happened? What existed before it was created? Not being existed. Okay, that doesn't work. So it can't have a beginning. Okay, and so if it can't have a beginning and it can't be eternal, then it can't be both. Okay. So that takes care of that. Therefore, being does not exist. Since non-being does not exist, and since being does not exist, we did non-being right at the start.
Yeah.
We really quick showed non-being can't exist, and the rest was showing that being can't exist. So since non-being does not exist, and since being does not exist, then nothing exists.
Which is
So you're
non-being.
saying there's nothing like absolutely true out there?
There is no objective, absolute anything.
Except that
There is no nature.
non-being is nothing existing.
So he's saying himself doesn't exist. Outside of
So, I know that stuff like this seems a bit far-fetched. He couldn't really be saying this, right? Now, these early skeptics are not very consistent. Remember that his main focus is not to tell you about the nature of non-being, or the non-being of nature. He's not focused on nature and explaining it, however, the same way that the pre-Socratics were. His main focus still is getting you into powerful positions that will benefit you the way you want to be benefited in your life. You have your desires. My job is to help you manipulate other people to help you satisfy those desires. That's his main focus. That's his main job. And so a lot of their metaphysics isn't very consistent. Or it seems like they didn't really continue working it out to all its logical implications. And so it could go one way or the other way, but that's not the sophist focus. The sophist focus is helping you achieve political prominence. That's what they're out to do. But later, skeptics absolutely come to all those crazy conclusions. You get all the way to someone like David Hume. He flat out thought that he was just a consciousness and everything was just an illusion of his mind.
So we thought he was crazy.
And there's a story that one time he was walking on the road and he had so convinced himself that a rock ahead of him wasn't really there that he tried to walk through it and whacked his foot hard. I don't know if the story tells you he broke his foot or whatever. But yes, you have Berkeley and Hume who flat out deny external reality. Absolutely real. You get all the way to Immanuel Kant, who creates the most convoluted philosophical system to try and make so that there is a reality even though we can't know anything about the reality. Because all their arguments against there existing some objective absolute reality is that we can't know anything about it. Everyone has their own subjective different experiences, so we can't really know anything about it. So Immanuel Kant goes through a ton of effort to say, yeah, there is this unknowable reality out there, but still trying to connect the views together. It's too hard to actually cover him real quickly and give you intuition because we haven't covered the other side yet. Because there's the empiricists and the rationalists. So, never mind, drop that. But yes, down the road, there are people who wholeheartedly reject that there is anything in existence but their consciousness. And that philosophy actually has a name. It's called Solipsism. The philosophy that, Solipsism. The philosophy that it's just your consciousness having an experience. I'm not real, they're not real, this room isn't real. There's just you and your consciousness experiencing. And that's all reality. Now, the majority of philosophers who ever existed said any philosophy that leads to that conclusion you reject. That's called a reductio ad absurdum argument, right? If my premises lead to solipsism, then obviously there's a problem with my premises, because obviously there's other beings in existence, and I'm not the only being in existence. But philosophers are willing to say, well, what if you are? And you can see where philosophy starts to lose a lot of respect, right? When the mathematicians start considering, what if 2 plus 2 really is 19? But what if it is? Let's just see what else is true if that really is the case. And let's develop a whole framework of mathematics based off of, but what if that is the case? No, that's absurd. Continue on. Reject it, move on. So that's why it feels like a lot of philosophical thought hasn't really progressed. All that's happening is people keep coming up with different ideas, and it seems like they're just ballooning out these ideas all over the place, rather than some good, solid foundation just being developed further and further and further. That's why after we cover Aristotle, I'm not going to have hardly any respect for anyone we talk about, except for Thomas Aquinas until we get to John Locke. Those are all just terrible.
If you did that, if you said 2 plus 2 equals 19.
I was just using that as an analogy, but if you allow a single contradiction into mathematics, I can prove anything you want. So if you say, let's look at the logical implications of that, the logical implications are everything.
No, I think they just develop the same logic, and their variables just change.
No, it becomes broken because 2 is well defined and 19 is well defined. Look, let's make it simpler. Rather than saying 2 plus 2 equals 19, okay, that's the same as saying 4 equals 19. There's no difference there, right? 2 plus 2 is 4, correct? So 4 is equal to 19. With me? Well, first give me something to prove. Doesn't matter. You want me to prove you're a chair?
Yeah.
Okay, I will prove that James is a chair. That's what we're going to prove. All right, let's see. We're going for James is a chair. So 4 equals 19. Subtract 4 from both sides and we get 0 equals 15. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Divide both sides by 15, we get 0 equals 1. Good?
Yep.
And then add 1 to both sides, we get 1 equals 2. Right? James and the chair are 2. Therefore, James and the chair are 1. Therefore, James is the chair. James and the chair are 2. Right?
Yes, there's 2 objects.
2 is 1. So James and the chair are 1. So James is the chair.
How does that make you feel?
So my analogy with mathematicians looking at the logical implications of these other things isn't quite a valid analogy. But gives you some intuition for why there comes a point where science and philosophy go their separate ways, and scientists start to lose a lot of respect for philosophers as a general rule. And that very much does happen. Okay. So we did that. Therefore, did we do all these? Yeah, we did all these. Okay, so nothing exists. But what if it does? Okay. Well, if anything exists, it is incomprehensible. You can't comprehend it. You can't understand it. You can't know it. It's incomprehensible. Even if something does exist. You can't comprehend it. Okay, so let's go over this one. If the concepts of the mind are not realities, then reality cannot be thought about, and therefore reality is not comprehensible. So I'm trying to show a short thing that we're going to try to get to.
Okay.
So if the concepts of the mind are not realities, so if what you comprehend is not reality, then reality cannot be thought about. If the things you comprehend aren't reality, then reality can't be comprehended or thought about. With me so far?
Because you can only comprehend the reality.
We haven't shown the antecedent to be true. So I'm going to say, look, this implication is true, and then I'm going to show the antecedent is true, and therefore this whole thing is true.
Okay.
So this is big picture where we're going, and then the heart of it's going to be showing the if part of this. So let's make sure we understand this implication. If the concepts of the mind are not realities, then reality cannot be thought about. If the concepts in your mind are not reality, then what you're thinking about isn't reality. So reality cannot be thought about. With me so far on this? Kind of weird language, so try and hang in there. And therefore, reality is not comprehensible. So you follow this implication here, right? So what remains to show is that the concepts of the mind are not realities. So if I can show that the concepts of the mind are not realities, then we're done. And that's what the rest of this is going to be trying to show. Everyone follow that?
Yeah.
All right. So let's tackle it. Okay. First off, we can think about non-realities, right? A chariot riding on water is the one that he uses. That's not reality. You can't have a chariot riding on water. We can think about non-realities. A chariot riding on water. You can fantasize about things that can't exist in reality. You can think about a purple dragon in the middle of the sun. Right? We can think about non-realities. Things seen are the objects of sight, and things heard are the objects of hearing. He's just picking two perceptions. It doesn't matter that he chose sight and hearing. He's just using those as two representatives. So the things seen are the objects of sight, and the things heard are the objects of hearing. Now, here's the crux of the argument. Well, not the crux, but an important part. We accept as real the things heard and not seen, and we accept as real the things seen but not heard. In other words, if we accept that perception, sight, gives us sight of realities, and hearing gives us hearing of realities. And if I just hear something but I can't see it, I still know that what I'm hearing really exists because it exists in reality. I accept that hearing is about realities, and I accept that sight is about realities. So just because I can't see you, just because I can only hear you and can't see you, doesn't mean I deny that reality. Right? And just because I can only see you and not hear you doesn't mean I deny that reality either. In other words, a blind person who can only hear still experiences reality only by hearing, and a deaf person who only sees also experiences reality only by seeing. And that one perception is enough for them to accept reality. They only need one perception to communicate to them about realities for them to accept it as reality. Right? So it doesn't matter if it's coming to you by your eyes, it doesn't matter if it's coming to you by your ears, it doesn't matter if it's coming to you by your touch. As long as it's coming to you one of these avenues that you accept as communicating to you about realities, you accept that as telling you about reality. With me so far? Okay. This one's kind of a weird one to follow, so hang in there. So we accept as real the things heard and not seen, and we can accept as real the things seen but not heard. If thought was about objects of reality, then we should be able to accept as real the objects of thought that are not seen or heard.
So that dragon.
Yeah. You can think about that dragon in the middle of the sun. Right? Why is that different than seeing or hearing or touching that dragon in the middle of the sun? Are you saying it's different? That perceptions are about reality, but thought isn't about reality? You see where he's going with this? So if thought was about objects of reality, then we should be able to accept as real the objects of thought that are not seen or heard. This would mean that non-realities, like a chariot on water or a purple dragon in the middle of the sun, are realities. Therefore, reality is not the object of thought, and so cannot be comprehended by thought. Sight might be about realities, hearing might be about realities, thought is not about realities. You see that? Therefore, if reality exists, it is not comprehensible by the mind, because the concepts of mind are not realities. You follow all that thinking? Bit of a mess, but if you follow it well enough, you might be confused. And if you follow it even better, you're not confused anymore.
Well, I'm confused.
So you followed it enough. All right, any questions about that? Okay, then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, Well, maybe you can comprehend reality. I don't know. But even if you can't comprehend reality, you sure can't tell me or anyone else about it. So no sense talking about it, right? He sure had a lot to say about how you can't communicate about reality. So if it's comprehensible, then it's incommunicable. You can't talk about it. You can't communicate it. The things which exist are perceptibles. Things that you can perceive. The things which exist are perceptibles. The objects of sight are perceived by sight. The objects of hearing are perceived by hearing. And the objects of touch by touch, etc. The sense perceptions cannot communicate with each other, and so I cannot come to understand objects of sight by hearing, nor objects of hearing by sight. I can never understand color through hearing, and I can never understand music through sight. I need hearing to comprehend music. I need sight to comprehend color. And I need touch to comprehend texture, or however you want to say it for each one. Each sense perception communicates about specific information, and that specific information alone. And my eyes can't tell my ears about color, and my ears can't tell my eyes about music. So let's read that one more time. The sense perceptions cannot communicate with each other, and so I cannot come to understand objects of sight by hearing, nor objects of hearing by sight. Follow so far? Humans communicate via speech, and speech is not the same thing as the things that exist, perceptibles. Humans communicate using speech. Speech is different from touch, taste, smell, perceptible. So the things you touch, the things you see, the things you hear. Speech is different. That doesn't make sense for hearing. Maybe he's saying the physical thing, so the perceptible would be my mouth talking. Anyways, speech is not the same thing as the things that exist. Oh, no, he means the speech is in the words. Sorry, the words themselves. Rock, the word rock, is not the same thing as a physical rock. The word cow is not the same thing as a physical cow. That's what he means here. Speech is not the same thing as the things that exist, namely perceptibles. Just as that which is seen cannot be heard, so too that which is speech cannot be equated with perceptible things. Then, when we talk, we communicate not the things which exist, but only speech. You with me?
Yeah.
The things of sight can only be communicated by sight. The things of hearing by hearing, etc. Speech can only communicate the things of speech. And speech is not a perception. So speech isn't about perceptibles. So speech isn't about the things of reality. You following that? It's kind of hard. So just as that which is seen cannot be heard, so that which is speech cannot be equated with perceptible things. Then, when we talk, we communicate not the things which exist, but only speech. Right? When we talk, we're not communicating perceptibles, we're communicating only speech. I can't communicate that actual table to you, I can only say the word table. Okay. And just as sight cannot communicate any information about sound, so too speech cannot communicate any information about existence. Therefore, even if we could comprehend reality, we could not communicate about it. There's the three arguments. You can't know anything, or there is no reality. Even if there was, you couldn't know anything about it. Even if you could, you couldn't tell anyone about it. So no sense talking about it. Any questions about Gorgias before we move on?
Crazy weird
Okay, Prodicus. Prodicus, he's a sophist that shows up in a lot of Plato's dialogues. He's a very minor sophist. We only have a couple things to say about him. We'll mention where he's from real quick. He's from the island of Chios. And that is, let's see, where's Athens? Here's Athens, Chios. It's that island right there. So, really close to Athens. He acts as an ambassador for his little island, and so he frequently visits Athens. Remember, everyone basically comes under Athens. Athens is kind of like the capital of all these cities. It's where a lot of diplomatic negotiations are made, and so naturally an ambassador from the island of Chios begins to spend a ton of time in Athens, which is how he gets into Plato's dialogues.
They don't have like officials in Athens, do they? 'Cause it's democracy, so don't they have like...
They still have elected officials, and there's still a political system. They're still like senators. They're still broken up into their separate tribes.
I'm just wondering who the ambassador would actually go to talk about things.
Yeah, so there's still offices that are voted in and positions are voted in. But when it comes to all the voting, it's completely democratic. So all the voting comes down to every citizen gets one and only one vote, and majority vote wins every time. And everything goes to the vote. So even something like an appointment of a general, there isn't some committee of experts meant to determine if he's qualified. It's just everyone votes, and he becomes a new general. Okay. So he's another one of these sophists. He's viewed as a major competitor of Gorgias. He viewed the sophists as being a borderline between statesmen and philosophers. So he'd say, over here you have your philosophers, which are interested in the theoretical. Over here you have your statesmen, which are only interested in the practical. And he thought that the sophists were somewhere in between to help communicate the theoretical with the practical and the practical with the theoretical. So had a very positive view of the sophist operation in society. Naturally he would, since he's a sophist. Now what he's famous for is his focus on correct terminology, distinctions between words, and the etymology of words. So one of the things that comes up in, I think it's the Gorgias, but it might have been in Protagoras. I can't remember which one. Oh, it was in Protagoras. In the Protagoras Dialogue, Prodicus is one of the people there, and Socrates mentions how Prodicus told him that he shouldn't use the word terrible when he's talking about something good. You shouldn't call something terribly good, because terrible has a negative connotation. So that's the wrong word to use there. So he would train his students to identify a bunch of synonyms with words, and then when you're talking about something positive, use one with positive connotation, and you want it to be negative, find one with a negative connotation.
These guys are smart.
Huh?
I said these guys are smart.
They're beginning a lot of things. So they're the first to do a lot of things. He's one of the first to really focus on how exactly we use words and which word is the right fit in just the right place. Because obviously they're all focused on persuasion. And so if there's a certain emotional appeal with a particular word, you want the one that captures that right emotional appeal. It's the best for your building. So that's what he's most famous for, is always trying to find the right word that perfectly captures what it is that you're going for. Now, the position that ultimately gets him in trouble is his position on deities, on the gods. He didn't believe in the pantheon that the Greeks believed in. And one of the things he speculated about was how the Greeks came to accept these things as gods. And his theory was that those things which are necessary and beneficial to man are transformed into divinities. So man will make a divinity out of anything that he views as necessary and beneficial. Thus bread becomes Demeter, wine Dionysus, water becomes Poseidon, and so on. Find anything that's necessary or beneficial to man, and they're going to deify it and make a god that represents it.
He has a very little view of God.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have thought much about the pantheon, and furthermore, he's speculating on why people would create these gods to begin with. So that's his little theory, and that's all we've got for Prodicus. Not much. Anything else before we get to Thrasymachus? All right, Thrasymachus, and you'll notice we don't have dates for him. We just have the 1 year. What does it mean when I just put 1 year up there? It's the year he was born, right? No, it's the year what? He was kicking. So we call it their floret. It's a year that they were flourishing, they were really active that year, so it was probably close to the middle of their life. Yeah, he was alive and kicking in that year, and that's what we know for sure. So, don't know much about him. Hardly know anything about him outside of, I didn't put the city he's from on.
Why is his name so prevalent? It's just so recognizable.
Because of the Republic.
That's where.
So the Republic is Plato's most famous work, most complete work, the work that if you've read Plato, you've read the Republic. The work that if you were to ask a bunch of philosophers, name the top 10 most influential writings, philosophical writings ever written, the Republic would show up on every single one of their lists. So, in fact, a lot of people go so far as to say you're not literate until you've read the Republic. So, very famous work, definitely the most famous of Plato's works. Thrasymachus is the main sophist being contended with early in the Republic, and so that's why he's so recognizable, even though we don't really have much about him, compared to like Protagoras and Gorgias. Anything else? So, don't know what city he was from. Must have accidentally removed it, but stuck the map in there. So, he's from somewhere in the blue. The dark blue. Narrow it down for you. Not sure where he was from, but I would guess somewhere close to Athens. Wherever he's from, he came to Athens as a sophist and spent most of his career there. What he was most famous for was coming up with the right gestures to use when you're emphasizing the words. So, certain gestures help portray certain emotions, get the right appeal. So, that's what he contributed to rhetoric. Must have come from Italy. Famous for his position that might makes right. That's what he's most famous for. Most people might know that, oh, might makes right, that's Thrasymachus. Or if you say Thrasymachus, what did he say? Might makes right. It's a very famous argument that people have all over the place. I'm sure that in speech it came up.
Did he come up with that?
Might makes right. He formally argues this position. Yes. He's not the first one to think it. Obviously, it's been thought tons of times in history, but he's arguing that, well, I don't know, he might be the first person that we know of that actually tries to argue that might makes right is the shorthand way of saying it, but that someone who's more powerful than you is justified in using you to their own ends.
Okay.
Because they can. If they can, they're justified in it. Might makes right. If you're strong enough, then whatever you want to do, you're justified in doing. And this comes from the Republic. So, go ahead. What?
So I feel like that has been a debate question.
I don't know about a debate question. That would come one year, I'm sure, but I'm sure that it's a topic that comes up quite frequently. Might makes right. Typical arguing point. So that's what he's most famous for. That comes from the Republic, and so Peter's going to start us out with the Republic, unless you want me to go first.
No, I should go first.
I thought as much.
Yeah.
He's not going to talk much about Thrasymachus. He's just going to go over the start of the Republic, which leads up to Thrasymachus entering the scene.
Yeah, like Donnie said, it's basically how the Republic came to be, to a sense. It's like the conversation that sparked the Republic with Socrates. The argument on justice takes place at Cephalus's residence, where in the first 4 books of the Republic, Socrates converses with the people present about what justice is. Is justice the attempt to help friends and harm enemies? Is justice just the interest of the stronger? And is injustice more profitable than justice? The argument arises with Socrates and Cephalus. Okay. Cephalus, where they engage with each other on the topic of what comes of old age and what impact can fortune have on a man's life. Socrates, when he first starts to converse with Cephalus, asks if old age is miserable and if the path to get there is rough or smooth. Most of our company are very sorry for themselves, looking back with regret to the pleasures of their young days, all the delights connected with love, affairs, and merrymaking. They are vexed at being deprived of what seems to seems to them so important. Life was good in those days, they think, and now they have no life at all, says Cephalus when he speaks with other men his age. Points out that when he talks with these other men, they complain about what they are now missing out on life, that the pleasures of this earth are past themselves and cannot now be fully enjoyed. These men make a connection with the miseries of old age and old age itself to be the cause of it. That in coming to reality with old age, you have to accept that once was is no longer. However, Cephalus states, but to my mind, Socrates, they are laying the blame on the wrong shoulders. He admits that old age does not allow us to fully enjoy pleasures of a sexual nature anymore. However, he says that it does us even better, and it frees us from the bondage of this passion. It doesn't cloud up our judgments on trivial things, but allows us to be fully conscious and come to an understanding of the pleasures of this earth. From this, he then states, all these troubles, Socrates, including the complaints about not being respected, have only one cause, and that is not old age, but a man's character. The troubles we bring upon ourselves are not because of our age or even really our circumstances, but rather the way we choose to look upon them and acknowledge them as such. To encourage Cephalus to continue this thought, Socrates then implores him with the question of whether wealth has anything to do with this theory. If it is true that a good man will not find it easy to bear old age and poverty combined, no more will riches ever make a bad man contented and cheerful. Cephalus responds. Cephalus is stating that if being wealthy has anything to do with a good man's happiness at old age, then it will also affect the happiness of a bad man. This makes both good and bad men fall under wealth for their own happiness, which is not the way one should live their life. Socrates then asks Cephalus if his wealth was acquired or inherited. Cephalus then answers that most of his wealth was inherited. Socrates then asks Cephalus if his wealth, Cephalus then answers that most of his wealth was inherited. To inquire further, Socrates asks if men who have made their money themselves tend to treat it as a creation of their own and have love for it as a father might have for a son, making them not good company. Socrates then asks, what do you take to be the greatest advantage you have got from being wealthy? I can tell you, Socrates, that when the prospect of dying is near at hand, a man begins to feel some alarm about things that never troubled him before. He then goes on saying that in contemplating life and thinking about the prospect of an afterlife, it becomes apparent that when you do what you do in this life will be judged. Men, especially old men, tend to think on the subject and determine for themselves if they have wronged anyone. Cephalus then supposes that if he finds that his life has been full of wrongdoing, he starts up from his sleep in terror like a child, and his life is haunted by dark forebodings. Whereas if his conscience is clear, that sweet hope that Pindar speaks of is always with him to tempt his age. If a man accepts the belief that there is an afterlife, then he will contemplate his own life to see what judgments await for him there. To then answer Socrates' question, he explains that a man who has accumulated his wealth through honesty and not through the cheating of others feels good about the prospect of an end and a new beginning. To touch on this thought even further, that a man who is willing to set aside his riches for the kingdom of God shall receive the blessings in heaven or the afterlife. At the start of the Republic, Socrates has a conversation with Cephalus on old age and how wealth can benefit a man near the end of his life and whether the prospect of what you can do on this earth will affect your outcome in the afterlife. Once this conversation ends, Socrates then, to the group present, confronts the matter of doing right, which leads to the discussion on justice.
Okay. Any questions on that? No questions? Nothing? That all made sense? All right. So, let me retell you the exact same story that he did, except for faster pace. All right, so what I'm going to do, I was going to kind of skip over this if you didn't want to do the deep dives into the dialogues, but since that seems like what you're more open to doing, I think what I'm going to try to do, no promises about the future, I'm going to try and do a deep dive into the entire Republic piecewise. So that when it's all said and done, when we finish the class, we will have covered the Republic with these deep dives without you actually reading it. But that's not a promise, that's just something I tried to do if you guys decided that you liked it. All right, so we'll quickly cover the first two books because they're relevant for the Sophists in particular in dealing with Thrasymachus and the political view that Sophists have in general. So Thrasymachus is viewed as a stand-in for how Sophists think about politics now. What's right or what's wrong for the polis? What's right or wrong for an individual in a government-type system? What should or shouldn't they do? They should do what they can get away with. Might makes right. That's what they should do. So we're going to see Thrasymachus argue that point, might makes right, here, and we're going to see how Socrates deals with him, since Socrates is obviously someone else that we're interested in. And it should be noted one more time that the first book of the Republic is thought to be a dialogue that Plato first wrote to capture the historical Socrates, and then added to it later with his own views. So you can view this as an evolution of, at first we're getting more Socratic thoughts, how Socrates actually thought, and he evolves into more Platonic thoughts and how Plato thought. And I think that's kind of obvious for those of you who read it. It feels like it kind of shifts gears when you're reading it. From when you're going to Thrasymachus to when they start talking about the Ring of Gaijins, that feels like more Plato starting to step in. Anyways, let's cover it. So, the Republic, how does it start out? It starts out with Socrates and the company going from the Permaeus. The Permaeus is like a little village at the harbor. So Athens is, like 3 miles from the sea, something like that. And so there's a little village town right where the harbor is for practical purposes. Obviously you want people right there, people are going to be interested in living right next to the coast. But it's still all considered Athens. So you have the main city of Athens, and then 3 miles away you have what we call the Permaeus, which is where these guys are at. So they're well outside the city. And there seems to be some sort of festival or something like that going on out here at the Permaeus, because obviously there's a lot of space. So people are coming out here to see it. They're on their way to go back to the city now, because whatever the festival is, it's over. So they're headed back. Well, while they're headed back, Cephalus, he is a very wealthy man. One of his sons or something like that knows Socrates and tells Socrates, no, come stay with Cephalus. Socrates is friends with Cephalus. They know each other quite well. So he tells him, no, come stay with Cephalus and come talk to us for a while, because the festival, there's going to be some more to it that you should see later. So he decides, okay, I'll go to the house of Cephalus and we'll talk for a bit until the next part of the festival. So Socrates and Cephalus is exactly what Peter was talking about. They discuss the troubles of old age, the benefits of wealth, and begin discussing justice. Now, so that's me briefly summarizing everything Peter talked about. Point out some things that Peter talked about, just minor corrections. Cephalus obtained his wealth. He didn't inherit it.
Okay.
He accumulated it. So what Socrates was saying to Cephalus was, did you accumulate your wealth or did you inherit it? Cephalus says, I accumulated it. And Socrates says, that's interesting, because you don't seem to have this love for your money like most people who accumulate their wealth do. He says most people who accumulate wealth, they have a second love of money. There's the love of money that everyone has because money is useful, and then there's a second love of money that those who accumulate great wealth have. They view it almost like they view their own child. And they're very poor company because all they ever want to talk about is money, 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 and how they make money and what they did to make money. So they're terrible company. You can't ever have a good conversation with them. And he's saying to Cephalus, he's complimenting him. He's saying, even though you're one of these people who have accumulated great wealth, it's not all you ever want to talk about. And you actually want to have a great conversation, philosophical conversation. And Cephalus loves it when Socrates comes along. Cephalus mentions how as you age, there's no longer you can't enjoy food like you used to. You can't enjoy a strong drink like you used to. You can't enjoy sexual relations like you used to as you age. He says, as those things lose their hold on you, you enjoy just conversation more and more. So he's enjoying conversation with Socrates more than he ever has. He's much older than Socrates. He's an old man. Socrates is a middle-aged man. So he's telling Socrates, please keep coming and visiting. I can't go all the way up to the city anymore, so come here and talk to me. I enjoy good conversation far more than I ever did, and I always did. Anyways, so he's having a conversation with Cephalus. They end up discussing justice. As justice comes up, Cephalus has to go on his way to do some sacrifices, passes the conversation on to his son, his heir, Polemarchus. So Polemarchus is the one that Socrates starts talking to. Polemarchus inherits the conversation. And their conversation is about what is justice. And Polemarchus puts forth the idea that justice is to render every man his due. Well, he says a poet by the name of Simonides says this, and he agrees with Simonides that this is what justice is. It's to render every man his due. Now, Socrates points out, we might have trouble with this definition. What happens if a friend of yours loans you some money, then when they're in a bad state of mind, comes back and asks for the money back? Should you give it to him? Or what if a friend of yours asks you, here, will you keep these weapons for me for now? And then they come back in a drunken state or something like that. Say, give me my weapons back. Should you give it back to him? Obviously, it's due to give it back to him. And it's theirs. They own it. You were just holding it for him. Is it just to give them back that weapon when they're in that kind of state, or the money when they're in that kind of state? So he's starting to poke at this definition a little bit to see, does it really hold up the way he does? And then furthermore, he pushes Polemarchus to say, then Polemarchus says, no, we can't do that because then you'd be doing harm to your friend, and justice can't do harm to your friends. A just action can't end up resulting in a harm to a friend, and Socrates pushes him to say, and what about to your enemies? So what Polemarchus ends up saying is, justice is to render every man his due. What is due and proper to render to a friend is good, and what is due and proper to render to an enemy is evil. So now justice is to do good to your friends and evil to your enemies. That's what justice is. With me so far? Now, Socrates shows how this view is inconsistent, and that you can't have that be. Should we try to summarize this view really quick?
Yeah.
I'm trying to hurry up and get to Thrasymachus and try and skip over this stuff, but maybe it's worth diving into a little bit. Socrates shows how this view is inconsistent. The view that justice is doing evil to an enemy. Socrates would say justice is doing good to your enemies. So you should do good to your enemies, not evil to your enemies. How does he make this argument? The argument goes something like this. Let's see if I can recall it on the fly. He would say, is a horse injured or improved by horsemanship? And Polemarchus would say, it's improved by horsemanship. And he'd say, for any art, doesn't matter what you pick, does it improve the person or does it harm the person in their excellence? So horsemanship improves horses in the excellence of horses, in the virtues of horses. It makes horses better horses. And so what improves and makes men better? Justice. Justice improves and makes men better. And can you, through the art of horsemanship, injure and make a horse worse? No, that doesn't make sense. Horsemanship can only make a horse better. You can't injure a horse through horsemanship. Well, what about justice? Is it possible that justice can injure and make a person worse than they were before? Is it possible that justice can make someone worse off than they were before? No, justice has to improve someone. So it can't be just to harm an enemy, to do evil to an enemy. You follow that? That's roughly how the thinking goes. Okay, so now we get to Thrasymachus. That's a big, long part of the conversation that we just cut down to nothing. What's Thrasymachus saying? Now, Thrasymachus is on the sideline, and he's watching these guys have the conversation going back and forth, and he kept trying to interrupt their conversations as they were going, and people kept stopping him from talking. Remember, this is always, all these conversations are always public conversations with a lot of people present, a lot of people listening. While two people are kind of talking, there's a big audience, and they'll throw in their 2 cents every now and then. So Thrasymachus, he's one of these sophists. He thinks he's a bright guy. He has a lot of good ideas. He's listening to this conversation. He's been trying to interject his position over and over again. The crowd kept stopping him. Finally, it comes to a point where he has an opportunity to voice his opinion. So he kind of says this out of frustration and rage because people won't let him talk. So finally gets a chance, calls out, "What folly, Socrates, has taken possession of you all? And why, silly billies, do you knock under to one another?" Knock under to one another and give way to each other so easily, saying, "Oh, you're right," and going back and forth, being wishy-washy. I say that if you want really to know what justice is, you should not only ask, but answer. And you should not seek honor to yourself from the refutation of an opponent, but have your own answer. Remember, Socrates goes around asking people what they think, and then showing how that leads to contradiction, and then asking again, showing how it leads to contradiction. So twice Polemarchus has tried to give a definition of justice, and Socrates has poked holes in it. So he's getting mad at Socrates for doing this, and this is the first time Socrates has done this. Thrasymachus has seen Socrates do this plenty of times. So he's really annoyed with Socrates. "For there is many a one who can ask and cannot answer, And now I will not have you say that justice's duty or advantage or profit or gain or interest for this sort of nonsense will not do for me. I must have clearness and accuracy. So he says, Socrates, I want you to tell me what justice is right now. You tell me. You don't get to just keep asking questions and poking holes in people's answers. You have to give an answer. Socrates says, I don't know what you want me to do. I never claimed to know what justice is. They were the ones saying what justice is. I'm just showing how they're wrong. Now, you're claiming that you know what justice is. So the person who claims to know should be the speaker, not the person who claims that they don't know. I already say I don't know what justice is. So it doesn't make sense for me to tell you what justice is. But if you think you know what justice is, then go ahead. You should be the one that speaks. And Thrasymachus pushes back. It's obvious to Socrates that Thrasymachus really wants to talk. So what Thrasymachus wants to happen here is he wants Socrates to give an answer. Then Thrasymachus is going to poke a hole in Socrates' answer and then come with his own answer that he thinks is infallible and Socrates won't be able to refute. So he wants to score some great points here with this audience. Because remember, he's a sophist, trying to establish his reputation just like anyone else. If he was the one to take down Socrates, that's going to do a lot to his name. So he's trying to get Socrates to give an answer first, but it's obvious to Socrates that Thrasymachus has an answer that he really wants to give. So Socrates says, Thrasymachus, just give your answer if you think you know what it is. Thrasymachus says, and what do you deserve to have done to you if I give you my answer? Socrates says, to learn. What else deserves to happen to ignorant people? They deserve to learn, I guess. And I'll praise you, I'll give you praise. Thrasymachus says, no, I want you to pay me. You have to give me money if I'm going to tell you what justice is. You got to pay me for this education. Now, Socrates, we probably haven't talked much about him yet, but Socrates lives a life of complete poverty. He doesn't really have money. But he has a lot of wealthy friends. The wealthy people, like Cephalus, for example, all seem to like Socrates. A lot of young people are drawn to him. We'll get more into why exactly when we cover him. But a lot of wealthy young people like to follow Socrates around, and so a bunch of them say, okay, Thrasymachus, just give Socrates your answer and we'll pay on his behalf. So we'll pay you for the answer. You just tell Socrates what your answer to justice is. If you can actually tell what justice is. If you can't, then we don't have to pay. So Thrasymachus has to give an answer that will hold up. So what's Thrasymachus' great answer for what justice is? He says, justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. Now, this is often summarized as might makes right. This is where they're saying, Thrasymachus says might makes right, exact statement. Justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. Now, Socrates points out how this is a bit ambiguous. Well, first I'll try to make intuitive sense of what he was going for here, and then give you a Socrates review. Justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. So the stronger are the people that take control in a state, right? The stronger are the ones who come to political power, political prominence. And then they're the ones that make the laws. And justice is following the laws that they make. They're the stronger, so they're the ones that take power. So justice is doing what they tell you to do, because that's what becomes laws. So justice is the interest of the stronger. That's what he's going for here. Now, we'll get to that in a sec. Socrates is going to point out how just this answer by itself is a bit ambiguous. Socrates points out that using this definition, since it's good for some really strong guy, we don't know who this is, but you know Andre the Giant? Maybe try and use like a more modern notion. So let's pretend that I'm talking to Thrasymachus for a second here, and he says justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. And I say, okay, so Andre the Giant. Do you guys know Andre the Giant? Have you seen The Princess Bride?
Yeah.
He's the big guy in that. Just a really big, strong guy. That's all we need. To stand in for a really big, strong guy. Think about someone like that. So Socrates says something to the effect of, well, think about Andre the Giant. If he were here, he'd be much stronger than all of us. And he needs a lot of food to keep him going. Eating a lot of food is in his interest. Since that's in his interest, then we should all eat a lot of food like he does, right? And we're justified in eating a lot of food like he needs to eat a lot of food, because that's the interest of the stronger. And Thrasymachus says, oh, Socrates, you're always doing this kind of cheating in arguments. No, you know that's not what I meant. And then he goes to explain more what exactly he meant by the statement. So he explains. In each state, the government is the ruling power, and the government makes the laws to protect its interests. With me so far? Okay. In this sense, the government, or the ruling class, are the strong, and justice is following the laws that they put forth. So justice is the interest of the strong. The strong are the ruling class. They make the laws, which are to protect their interests. Justice is following those laws. Think you got it? Okay, well, with this explanation, Socrates thinks he understands too and is ready to poke a hole in this argument taken this way. Okay, so Socrates begins questioning Thrasymachus, and he asks, all right, so you say that justice is the interest of the stronger, and they make these laws to protect their interests. So, is it just for the subjects to obey these rules, these laws, that the rulers pass? Is it just for the subjects to obey the laws? Thrasymachus says, yes, of course. And he says, okay, but these laws are made by people. People are sometimes fallible, right? And so your rulers, as good a people as they may be, they're still liable to err. And there's going to be once or twice that they make a mistake in producing their laws, right? People are liable to err. People make mistakes. Even the rulers of the state are going to eventually make a mistake. They're liable to err. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if the rulers will sometimes make a mistake in making laws, then the rulers will sometimes accidentally make laws opposed to their own interests. Right? That's what it means for them to make a mistake in the laws. If they're trying to make the laws to always protect their interests, and one time they make a mistake, then one time they make a law that's opposed to their interests. Right? Yes. Then justice, according to the argument, is not only obedience to the interest of the stronger, but also the reverse. Contradiction. You're saying it's justice for me to always obey the laws, and once in a blue moon there's a law that isn't the interest of the stronger, and it's just for me to obey that law, then it's just for me to do something opposed to the interest of the stronger. So you said justice is the interest of the stronger, you just agreed that justice is opposed to the interest of the stronger. Contradiction. So there's a problem with your definition of justice. You with this so far? Okay. Now, Thrasymachus gets angry again. And he backpedals a bit, and how's he going to go at this? You see the problem that he got in. The problem that he got in is right here. Our ruler is sometimes liable to err. When he said yes to this, this is the one he wants to undo. So he's got to backpedal, and he's got to undo that somehow. And he says, Socrates, you're taking a way of speech too seriously, too strictly. When we say that a physician makes a mistake, then when they're making the mistake, the name physician doesn't really apply. So a physician, to the extent that they are a physician, never really makes a mistake. And if I'm a mathematician, so we say that I'm a mathematician, if when I'm solving some math problem I make a mistake, then in the instant I'm making a mistake, I'm not really a mathematician in the strict sense of the word. You following this?
Okay.
That's strange.
So in the instant I'm making a mistake, I can't be what my profession says I am. Because obviously I'm not producing that art. If I make a mistake, what I'm doing isn't math. So in that instant, I'm not a mathematician. It's only when I'm doing it right that I being a mathematician applies. It's only when I'm practicing medicine perfectly that physician applies. And it's only when I'm being a ruler to the extent that I am a ruler, in that strict sense of the word, that the word ruler applies. I'm only stronger in the instances where I am producing laws in my interest. And in that instant, where I made a mistake and produced a law that wasn't in my interest, I wasn't a ruler or the stronger at that time. And so your argument doesn't work because rulers, in the strict sense of the word, never really make mistakes. You see his argument there? Now you can see how there's a lot of problems with that, and you could try and attack him on this, but Socrates is pretty clever and decides, okay, I'll let you have that. But in this sense, a ruler never errs. So Socrates is going to come at the argument from another position rather than arguing against his premise. That very common thing Socrates does. He doesn't really argue with your premises. He lets you have whatever premises you want and then just shows how that still leads to contradiction. So he's going to show, okay, I'll even let you have this, and I'll still show you how your definition doesn't work. So, continuing. So Socrates says, all right, I like this speaking in the strict sense of the word. Let's stick with that. Let's always talk in the strict sense of the word. So, is a physician a healer of a sick or a maker of money in the strict sense of a word? What does a physician do? They only heal the sick, right? Whether I make money or not as a physician has nothing to do with me being a physician. My being a physician means I heal the sick in the strict sense of the word. They're not a money maker, they're a healer of the sick. The fact that they sometimes happen to make money, usually most of the time, is completely irrelevant to them being a physician. The fact that they benefit from performing their art is completely irrelevant. The art of medicine is completely about healing the sick. That's all it's about. It's not about making money. In the strict sense of the word. With me so far? He just uses that as one example. He lists out a bunch of examples. And the ship's captain, in the strict sense of the word, is someone who navigates the ship and protects the crew. He doesn't look to making money in guiding the ship, in the strict sense of the word, as a ship's captain. All he looks towards is navigating and protecting his crew. That's what the ship's captain does. Whether he gets paid for it or not is completely irrelevant. Whether he benefits from it or not is completely irrelevant. Strict sense of the word, that's all he does. Now, in general, so he lists out a bunch of these. I didn't want to list too many. Don't want to put you all the way to sleep. So, in general, every art has an interest for which the art has to consider and provide. Right? Medicine looks to the body that's trying to heal. Ship's captain looks to the crew. Architect looks to the building. Shepherd looks to the sheep. Follow the generalization? Okay. And the art only looks to its subject and not to itself. Medicine does not consider the interests of medicine, but the interests of the body. And art doesn't look to itself, it looks to its subject. That one might be a little bit ambiguous because you might think medicine is like medications that you take. Don't think that. We're talking about medicine in the field. So you might think medicine in the field looks to medications that you need to take to heal the body. No, this is the same medicine here and there. I don't know if anyone went down that road. I just realized it when I looked at it. You feel like you understand this line? Every art just looks to its subject, not to itself. Good? Okay. And are the arts superior to their subjects? Yeah. Then the arts are the superiors and the rulers of their subjects, and yet they only look to the interest of their subjects. Right?
Yeah.
The physician only looks to the patient. The physician doesn't look to the physician.
Right.
Medicine only looks to the healing of the body. Medicine doesn't look to medicine.
Right.
Okay. Hopefully before we read that, you now see the contradiction. Then the art of ruling only looks to the ruled, and not to the ruling, not to the rulers. A ruler, in the strict sense of the word, doesn't look to their own interests, but the interests of their subjects. The superior always looks to the interest of its subject. Contradiction. So, that's where you're going with this. Then there is no... Sorry, you gotta find the right distance. Then there is no one in any rule who, insofar as he is a ruler, in that strict sense of the word, considers or enjoins what is for his own interests. Enjoins is just like prescribes. So let's read that one more time. Then there is no one in any rule who, insofar as he is a ruler, considers or enjoins what is for his own interests, but always what is for the interests of his subjects or suitable to his art. To that he looks, and that alone he considers in everything which he says and does. And so, justice cannot be the interest of the stronger, of the ruling class. It must be the interest of the subjects. You follow that? How he's done with Thrasymachus so far?
Mm-hmm.
Now, he has a much better argument. We kind of rushed through a lot of stuff. You can go back and read it. It's kind of fun to read these conversations. Anyways, so that kind of takes care of the justice part. Now, Thrasymachus is going to bring up another point. He kind of hurries up and says two things really quick back to back. Oh, yeah. He kind of says two things back to back here really quick. He says, no, Socrates, you're wrong. Here's a counterexample to show you're wrong. Furthermore, it doesn't even matter if you're right, because injustice is superior to justice. Okay? That's kind of what he does here really quick. So, he says, no, Socrates, you're wrong. That isn't what justice is. Even if that is what justice is, who cares? Because actually injustice is superior to justice. And what is injustice? He defines injustice as a man's own profit and interest, often at the expense of the weaker. He just says this part, but it's implied in how he says it, this second part. So I just threw that on there. So now he's bringing up the second argument. So first argument, no, Socrates, you're wrong. That isn't what justice is. You made a mistake. There's a counterexample of an art that does look to its own interests, and justice is one of those arts. Furthermore, it doesn't even matter because it turns out injustice is superior to justice, and that's what we ought to care about anyways. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I don't know if I'm going to mention how Socrates deals with this. Okay, I don't. So, his counterexamples, Socrates hurry up and does away with. It shows how they're not really counterexamples, so the previous argument that Socrates gave still holds in every way. But now Socrates is very interested in the second point that Thrasymachus brought up. He's very interested in the point that injustice is superior to justice, which Thrasymachus seems to be claiming, which a lot of sophists seem to claim, that injustice is superior to justice. And Thrasymachus gives a lot of examples of how injustice is superior to justice. He would say, consider someone who gets some public position. One of them's a just man, one of them's an unjust man. The just man is going to continue out the public position in a perfectly just way. How you say Socrates, only looking to the interests of his inferiors, and therefore he's not going to profit himself from having some political position. He's not going to embezzle any money, he's not going to use funds how he should, he's not going to use his political power to appoint friends in the right places to come back and benefit him in some way. The just man is going to carry out that office perfectly justly and in no way benefit from holding that political position. But the unjust man, when he gets that political power, he's going to use it to put all his friends in high places and they're going to come back to benefit him. He's going to make tons of money off of it. It's going to be a great thing for him. So the unjust man comes out superior to the just man when they both gain a political office. Another example, what happens when the state asks for an income tax? The just man, that poor fool, he's going to pay an honest income tax. And if he's not sure exactly how it comes out, he's going to overpay rather than underpay to make sure that he covered his income tax and isn't cheating the state. Where the unjust man is going to cut every corner that he can so that he underpays when an income tax is asked for. And once again, the unjust man benefits more than the just man. And you could generalize this to a bunch of other examples. He lists a few. So he goes off showing how the unjust man continues to live a much better life than the just man. And he goes all the way to the extreme of talking about a tyrant. He talks about a tyrant over in, I think it was Macedonia, where some man was like a slave or something like that, ended up killing the current man in power and becoming a tyrant over the whole state. And Thrasymachus is saying what he did is obviously unjust. He murdered everyone he could find, killed any of his competitors, came to political power, and now he's a tyrant. Who's happier than him? He lives the best life on earth, that tyrant, and he's committed the greatest injustices you could think of. He got power of the military, seized the wealth of the wealthy citizens. Now he has all the wealth, all the military power. He's at the head of the state. Who lives a better life than him? So the unjust man, once again, benefits far more than the just man in how he lives his life. So now Socrates is ready to, he did away with Thrasymachus' counterexamples, and now he wants to move on to this next topic. Socrates argues that every man, including Thrasymachus, thinks justice is superior to injustice, and furthermore, that it is better to suffer than commit an evil. This is another telltale Socratic doctrine. Better to suffer than to commit an evil. It's better that you suffer an injustice than you commit an injustice. He goes on to give his proof, little by little, getting Thrasymachus to agree, step by step. You can go read it if you want. What we're focusing on here is the sophist political positions. But Socrates does away with that argument. Now, Glycon comes along, and he's not happy. Thrasymachus kind of gives up once Socrates is done with him. After we're all done with this, I mean, we've already gone through like 2 dialogues worth of material. Thrasymachus has been cross-examined for probably like an hour come to this point. He's just exhausted. He's done. So Socrates is done with Thrasymachus. Glycon isn't very happy. Glycon's just another person that happened to be here. Glycon's Plato's older brother, if that matters to you. And he wants to continue having this conversation about justice. He feels like, even though they've gone through all this, it's still not clear to his mind what exactly justice is. And so he starts asking Socrates a couple questions. So Glycon describes 3 classes of good, those things desirable for their own sake, but not for their consequences. An example of this would be like, I don't know, a glass of wine. People who drink wine, they drink it for the good feeling that wine immediately brings, but not for any long-term consequences. In fact, they're opposed to long-term consequences. Or eating a piece of cake. When you eat a piece of cake really quick, it's for that immediate pleasure, for the good you instantly enjoy, and not for some long-term consequence. So there's 3 classes of good. Those things desired those things desired for their own sake, but not for any future consequence, eating a piece of cake. Those things desired only for the consequence. This would be like painful medications. You have to take gross medicine, or gymnastics, working out your body. We say gymnastics, that means something now that used to then, back then, it was just working out. That's something that's painful to do, but you do it for the long-term consequences. So something that, even though it's painful in the short term, we desire it because its long-term consequences are good. And then finally, there are those things that are desired for their own sake and for their long-term consequences. That would be something like mathematical knowledge. Why do we do mathematics? We enjoy doing mathematics then and there, but we also enjoy it because it has beneficial long-term consequences. It's good to know math in the long run, and it's fun to do it in the short term. So Glycon points out that there's these three classes of goods. And he points out how most people, including the Sophists, place justice in the second category and not in the third. So most people view justice as something that, yeah, it's not great in the short term, but we like it for its long-term consequences. And he wants Socrates to argue that justice is actually in the third category. Justice is something that's desirable in and of itself and for its long-term consequences. We don't just like it for its long-term consequences, but it's a desirable thing in and of itself. So Glycon pushes Socrates to retake up the argument. Here's his verbiage, trying to convince Socrates to retake up the argument. Thrasymachus seems to me, like a snake, to have been charmed by your voice sooner than he ought to have been. But to my mind, the nature of justice and injustice have not yet been made clear. Setting aside their rewards and results, I want to know what they are in themselves and how they inwardly work in the soul. If you please then, I will revive the argument of Thrasymachus, and first I will speak of the nature and origin of justice according to the common view of them. Secondly, I will show that all men who practice justice do so against their will, or of necessity, but not as a good. And thirdly, I will argue that there is reason in this view, for the life of the unjust is after all better far than the life of the just. So Glycon's going to try and retake up the argument. Glycon doesn't agree with any of this. He agrees with Socrates, but he thinks Thrasymachus is just giving up too easy, and so he tries to get Socrates to retake up the argument of justice. So first he talks about the origin of justice. He says, why did justice come into being? He says the reason justice came into being is because people in their political societies experienced justice, they experienced injustice. And while everyone wanted to commit injustices, they never wanted to suffer an injustice, right? It's really nice to steal, but it sucks to be robbed. And so when they weighed stealing versus being robbed, they really want to steal, but they really don't want to be robbed. When they weigh the two in the scales, they decide it's better to give up stealing and have the benefit of not being robbed. So Thrasymachus saying, not Thrasymachus, Glycon, trying to speak on behalf of the Sophists, trying to revive their own arguments, is saying, this is the origin of justice, this is how it came to be. Then he says, and I'll prove to you that men really prefer injustice to justice. And he uses the story of the Ring of Gaijins to do this. So the story of the Ring of Gaijins is, there was some shepherd, and while he was out tending his herd, there was a great earthquake in the ground. And he went down in the earth, and he found deep down in the earth a ring. And he took the ring, and he placed it on his finger, and he goes back up with the rest of the shepherds that are all taking care of the king's flock. And he discovers that if you turn the ring so that the stone, there was a stone on the ring. If you turn the ring so that the stone on the ring faces down, he was invisible. But if he turned it back up, then he was visible again. So he discovers that he has this great power. So the shepherds are meeting together. One of them needs to go back and give an account to the king of the sheep. So the shepherd volunteers for the job. He says, I'll do it. And he ends up going there, going to the king. He goes invisible, kills the king, seduces the king's wife, ends up becoming king of the entire kingdom, and lives a great, wonderful life. Ring of Gaijins story. So he's using this as an example. He said, now suppose that we had two such rings, and we gave one ring to a supposedly just man. So suppose we had this ring and we give it to a supposedly just man. Someone who we say is just. We're going to show that no men really prefer injustice to justice. So take whoever you think is really a just man, and let's give him this ring. And he says, no person would really be able to resist using this ring. If this person were truly just, you give them a ring that makes them go invisible, what are they going to use it for? They're never going to use it. They have nothing to use it for. You give it to someone who just pretends to be just. Once they get this ring, And once they have the ability to steal in the market without anyone ever catching them, once they can go into anyone's house they want and sleep with any woman they want, once they have the power to go into the prisons and release their friends anytime their friends get in prison and go around killing anyone who they want to kill, if they actually had this power, no one would really be able to stop themselves from using this power. In other words, once you really give someone the chance to commit an injustice and get away with it, no one is really just. Now, it's just a story. It's not a rigorous argument, but you see the story, right? And proof that the life of the unjust man is better than the life of the just. He goes on to say, and I'll prove that justice in and of itself is not more valuable than injustice in and of itself. He says if you want to really prove that justice is superior to injustice, you have to do two things. We're going to allow one man to be perfectly just. But to see if a just life is really better than an unjust life, he also needs to be perceived by everyone else as completely unjust. So we're going to imagine two men. We got man 1 and man 2. This man is completely just, but seems completely unjust to everyone else out there. So the whole world views him as unjust even though he's just. This man, the exact inverse is true. He's a completely unjust man, but the whole world views him as just. And he says, so let's look at the unjust man first, that the whole world, but he has a reputation of justice. And we'll see who of these lives a better life. Because if justice is really superior to injustice, then this man should have the better life than the unjust man who everyone thinks is just, right? So let's try to do a rough sketch of both their lives and see who has a better life. He says, let's look at the unjust man. First off, the unjust man, since he's an unjust man, he has no problem with anytime he gets a little bit of power taking advantage, using whatever little power he gets to get the upper hand, get advantage. So he's going to be able to get wealth real easy in the city. Since everyone views him as just, he's going to have all the opportunity in the world. So he's going to be able to obtain political offices. He's going to be able to marry the daughters of the best man. He's going to be able to make himself super wealthy. He has no problem taking advantage of everything that he's given to make himself even more powerful. And at the same time, everyone praises him as the most just man, this wonderfully just man. He's got the best of both worlds. Now let's look at this poor soul over here. This man is completely just, but viewed as unjust. He is completely hated by his society. You know, he's a guy who's just always in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something bad happens, and he walks right after it happens. Other people come around, see that he's there with the bad event, accuse him of doing it. So he's just always in the wrong place at the wrong time. Terrible luck. Viewed as a completely unjust man, even though he is perfectly just. He's despised and hated by his society. Eventually, they're going to be so sick of him that they're going to end up, I don't know everything it says, like burning out his eyes, cutting off his ears, ripping out his tongue, and finally taking his life because he's such an unjust man and deserves to die. Now he says, Socrates, are you really going to say that this man over here lives a better life than this man over here? After all, this man is the one who is perfectly just, and this man is the one who's perfectly unjust. So he says, Socrates, I want you to convince me that this man really has merit than this man. And it's dealing with this that the rest of the Republic is concerned with. Socrates showing that, yep, this is still superior to this. Better to be unjust and suffer, better to be just and suffer an injustice than to be unjust. And so that's what the rest of the Republic is dealing with. So if you want to know how he deals with that, go read it. Wonderful. Okay, so that's the end of Thrasymachus in there. That's a setup to how the Republic's going to continue from here. So you hopefully gave you a little bit of desire to go back and read it. Brief sketch of where we're going from here. So this finishes the Sophists. We're not going to cover any more Sophists. So when you come back next time, we're going to quickly do the Peloponnesian Wars. Whoever of you is on the Peloponnesian Wars, be ready for that. If it is, it might be someone who's already gone now. Then we're going to do Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle, then Alexander the Great. So whoever's on Alexander the Great, you need to be ready for that. And then we'll do Euclid, and that's as far as I know that we're going to do so far. So I don't have any of the slides figured out yet, so I got a lot to do. Yeah, you guys writing your little papers think you have it hard. Try to come up with a 2-hour presentation. Okay, so that's it for this. Any questions? Anything you want to review before we call it? Great. So we'll call it. Those of you